The threat apparently foiled, the terrorist alert level immediately went up to critical, indicating that a terrorist attack was still deemed imminent. In response to this insanity, the airports immediately introduced an absurd draconian policy regarding carry-on luggage. No liquids could be carried onto the plane. iPods, phones and even books were banned, and mothers were made to taste their baby milk to prove it wasn't explosive. Thankfully, our Prime Minister managed to depart for his family holiday in the Caribbean before the airport clampdown occurred. As Blair also helpfully explained at the Labour conference, ID cards, traditionally resisted by the public, would be introduced. Again, because he says they are necessary in a changing world. But every one of the 4 alleged 7-7 bombers would have legally had one. So what are they hoping to achieve with them? ID cards will have the same effect on preventing terrorism as licence plates have in preventing car crashes. And there's now talk of introducing biometric identification, iris scans and body scanners. Who is actually being watched here? The so-called terrorists? Or us? MI5 has boosted its numbers since the attacks by 25%. The Metropolitan Police has requested funding for an additional 1,500 anti-terrorist police, while police powers have risen considerably. These include the right to detention without trial. The UK is currently the only European nation to have suspended Article 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which prevents such detention. How can a supposedly free, moral and rational society allow the imprisonment of human beings without having the evidence to actually charge them with wrongdoing? What happened to the concept of innocent until proven guilty? When was it decided that this no longer applied to every one of us, irrespective of race or background? Consider the cases of the following terrorists. Walter Wolfgang, the 82-year-old pensioner removed from the Labour Party conference in September 2005 for heckling Jack Straw, and then, after he tried to gain re-entry, detained under the Terrorism Act. 80-year-old John Catt, stopped by police for wearing a t-shirt suggesting that Bush and Blair be tried for war crimes, searched under the Terrorism Act. Sally Cameron, arrested and held for 4 hours for walking on a cycle path in Dundee, under the Terrorism Act. Isabel Ellis Cockcroft, stopped and searched under the Terrorism Act, despite being 11 years old. Ian Blair said in a GMTV interview in February 2005, "I don't think people should distinguish crime and terrorism too easily." Think about those words coming from the Chief of Police. I don't think people should distinguish crime and terrorism too easily. In the most extraordinary and draconian expansion of their powers ever seen in the UK, the Serious Organised Crime and Police Act came into power in 2005. The provision you may have heard about in the media was Section 132, the restriction to demonstrate within 1 kilometre of Parliament Square, obviously an essential tool in fighting organised crime. The first conviction under the Act was in December 2005, after Maya Evans was arrested for reading out the names of British soldiers killed in the Iraq War under the cenotaph, without permission. Since when was peaceful protest a serious organised crime? But the more important section of the Act, and one that was barely mentioned by the mainstream media, was the changes made to the powers of arrest used by the police. From New Year's Day 2006, the police can now arrest you for any offence at all, including dropping litter or not wearing a seatbelt. Indeed, according to the actual wording of the Act, the police can even arrest you, quote, to enable the name of the person to be ascertained. If you don't think they would ever actually do that, ask yourself why they would include it in the Act at all, if they were never going to use it. We are constantly told that the terrorists, especially the CIA-created Islamic group Al-Qaeda, are attacking our way of life and our freedom. But these transparently absurd claims are made only by our government, never by the terrorists themselves, who consistently cite very different and very specific grievances. And ironically, it's not the terrorists attacking our way of life, but our own government. Through the expansion of police powers and stringent anti-terrorist measures being imposed upon Britain, they are using our fear for our safety to restrict our liberty and they are using their false promises of security to erode our privacy. This is happening now, and it's happening to every person in the UK. You are not somehow exempt from the regulatory provisions of the new police state being brought into this country. The terrorists cannot take away our freedom or change our way of life. Only our own elected leaders can do that. And they are. If you have examined any of the information released about the attacks of the 7th of July, or if you get your news from a reputable source, i.e. one outside of the mainstream media, then you probably are one of those advocating an inquiry into the London bombings. We suggest you stop wasting your time. Why? Because full public inquiries are not full, and they're not public. These terms are used simply to delude us into thinking that the process of an inquiry is intended to uncover the truth about something. This is simply not the case. Let's recall the last major public inquiry held in the UK, the Hutton inquiry, set up to investigate the apparent suicide of Dr. David Kelly, with a side mandate of examining whether the government manipulated intelligence to facilitate the invasion of Iraq. Given that Hutton was appointed by Lord Faulkner, the very man who continues to declare that the Iraq invasion was somehow legal, it is unsurprising that Hutton absolved Blair and his government of blame. The inquiry refuted allegations that the government had lied about information on Iraq's non-existent weapons of mass destruction, something that any rational person doing an hour of research can see clearly that they did. And more incredulously, Hutton ruled that Dr. David Kelly committed suicide, despite all the physical and medical evidence that clearly points to him having been murdered. But it gets worse. As if public inquiries were already not pointless enough, a recent piece of legislation now guarantees that they will never be